The Vietnam War exposed a confluence of strategic miscalculations, doctrinal rigidity, and human-level breakdowns in morale and discipline. American military doctrine in the 1960s was optimized for large-scale, high-intensity warfare against uniformed state armies, not for the fluid, decentralized guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong and People's Army of Vietnam. U.S. commanders applied overwhelming firepower, artillery barrages, saturation bombing, for example, Operation Rolling Thunder, in hopes of attriting communist forces, but this often failed to break guerrilla will or cut off supply streams via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. From the outset, U.S. policymakers tasked military leaders with not only defeating North Vietnamese forces, but also nation-building South Vietnam, training and sustaining a viable local government and army. This dual mission created impossible demands, stretching resources thin and diluting combat focus, a central critique in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia. By asking military strategists to simultaneously fight a war and build a nation, senior U.S. policymakers had asked too much. By the early 1970s, widespread drug use, desertion, and outright fragging of unpopular officers signaled deep fractures in the American ranks. Studies commissioned by the Army found that nearly half of low-ranking soldiers engaged in some form of dissent or disobedience, rising to 55% if drug use was included, an unprecedented level of GI resistance that ceased to function as an effective fighting force. American GIs faced constant ambushes, booby traps, and the psychological toll of distinguishing civilians from combatants. By war's end, approximately 50% of returning veterans suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, a higher proportion than in World War II. The average age of combat troops was just 22, compounding vulnerability to stress and disillusionment. For the first time, nightly television brought graphic battlefield footage, wounded soldiers, civilian casualties, into American homes. This unfiltered exposure eroded public support and emboldened anti-war protests, creating a feedback loop. Media reports fueled dissent, which in turn undercut soldiers' morale, knowing the war's legitimacy was under question at home. The lottery draft system disproportionately conscripted minorities and lower-income youths, fueling perceptions of inequity. College deferments and medical exemptions left many communities feeling unfairly targeted, intensifying domestic opposition and reducing political will to continue prosecuting the war. The Viet Cong exploited an elaborate network of underground tunnels to ambush U.S. patrols and evade aerial surveillance. American forces lacked effective counter-tunnel technologies and underestimated the tunnel's strategic impact, allowing guerrillas to sustain operations despite heavy bombing. U.S. intelligence often overestimated enemy casualties while underestimating North Vietnam's political resolve and popular support. Such miscalculations led to overly optimistic reports to Washington, masking the true resilience of communist forces. As American casualties mounted and the Tet Offensive in 1968 shocked U.S. public opinion, political constraints tightened. The 1973 War Powers Act curtailed executive branch freedom to deploy troops without congressional approval, a direct legislative backlash to the perceived imperial overreach in Vietnam. The trauma of Vietnam engendered the so-called Vietnam Syndrome, a reluctance to commit ground troops abroad without clear objectives and exit strategies. This syndrome shaped U.S. interventions, or lack thereof, for decades, reflecting lessons learned from Vietnam's exposed weaknesses.